nation will endure as it has endured.
Our long national nightmare is over.
Give me a break. That's a bunch of malarkey.
Welcome to Planet America. I'm John Barron.
And I'm Licciardello.
This week, the battle over Biden's cabinet heats up and Donald Trump re-emerges to tease a 2024 comeback.
We're going to be talking to the king of the never-Trumpers, Bill Kristol, and I'll take a look at whether the kids in cages are back under another name. But first...
This week, the United States passed 500,000 deaths from COVID-19. The milestone was marked at the National Cathedral in Washington, D.C. The bell tolled 500 times, one for every 1,000 deaths. It rang out for a full 50 minutes. President Biden held a candle lighting ceremony at the White House, and he said, despite the massive loss of life, individuals must not be reduced to statistics. And he again drew on personal loss to identify with the grief of American families.
I know all too well. I know what it's like to not be there when it happens. I know what it's like when you are there, holding their hands. There's a look in your eye and they slip away. That black hole in your chest, you feel like you're being sucked into it. The survivor's remorse, the anger, the questions of faith in your soul. For some of you, it's been a year, a month, a week, a day, even an hour. And I know that when you stare at that empty chair around the kitchen table, it brings it all back no matter how long ago it happened.
Flags are flying at half-mast for 5 days. The US passed 500,000 deaths just over 1 month after they passed 400,000. But there is some good news to report as well this week. A third coronavirus vaccine is about to be approved for emergency use. This is the one from Johnson & Johnson. It is a single-shot vaccine which only requires normal refrigeration. It's got a 72% overall efficacy rate, 86% effective against severe forms of COVID-19. J&J say they will ship 20 million doses during the next month and 100 million by the end of June. And while that is coming down the line, happily, Chaz, as well, the numbers of new cases and deaths in the United States is already going down quite dramatically.
They really are, although still higher than the peak of the first two waves. Daily new cases are down to about 70,000 now. Hospitalisations are into the 50,000s, and daily new deaths are hanging around the 2,000 a day mark. Unfortunately, the snowstorms have seen fewer people getting vaccinated. Those numbers have dropped to about 1.3 million doses a day. But as you say, John, it's still a good week for vaccines. By the end of March, Pfizer and Moderna are now promising 220 million doses between them. So that's 110 million people being fully vaccinated. And Johnson & Johnson is promising another 20 million people being vaccinated. Put that all together, and some doctors are now predicting that herd immunity may arrive by sometime in April. The big wild card, though, is, of course, the spread of new variants. Pfizer and Moderna are already working on updating their vaccines to target variants better. Pfizer reckons they can do that in 60 days, which is pretty amazing. Although there's one other thing to worry about, and that is everyone else. Rich countries only have 14% of the world's population, but as of December, they'd brought up 53% of the most promising vaccines, including almost all of the 2021 production from Moderna and Pfizer. Canada actually bought enough for 5 complete immunisation programs per citizen, whereas America bought 4 complete vaccination programs per citizen. Johnson & Johnson may come in handy there, though. Their vaccine is super cheap. It only requires a single dose, and it has 1 billion doses coming this year. Also, it happens to have milder side effects than the other vaccines. And while it does have a lower efficacy than some vaccines, as John said, there were literally 0 hospitalised or dead patients after 28 days of its trial. Either way, it is important that something helps the poor countries, because morality aside, That's where the next deadly variant may well evolve. And the last thing the world needs is a round 2 of this. Life expectancy in America dropped an entire year during the first half of 2020. It dropped 3 years for black people and 2 years for Hispanics. And that was all just in the first half of 2020. Imagine how much life expectancy must have dropped by now.
Yeah, pretty extraordinary figures, those ones. Meanwhile, President Biden's $1.9 trillion COVID relief bill is expected to pass the House this weekend, and then it'll head to the Senate, where it is likely to see some very significant changes indeed. The proposed increase in the minimum wage from $7.25 to $15 an hour looks like being the first casualty. Earlier today, the Senate parliamentarian ruled it could not be included if the bill is going to be passed through that process of budget reconciliation, which only requires a 51-vote majority. In its current form, the non-partisan Congressional Budget Office says that while a $15 federal minimum wage would lift 900,000 Americans out of poverty, it would also reduce total employment by 1.4 million. Now, Joe Biden campaigned on this issue. Bernie Sanders wants this $15 wage in this bill, but other Democrats like Joe Manchin say $15, dunno, $11 is the rate that he thinks is best for his state of West Virginia, where, to be fair, the cost of living is lower than some places like New York, where $15 might be more reasonable. Republicans, though, like Mitt Romney and Tom Cotton, think that's all way too much, putting forward a figure this week of $10 an hour in 4 years from now, which would then rise with inflation. That is to cushion some of the short-term impact on businesses now suffering under COVID. But Mitt Romney ultimately says his objective in this process is pretty simple.
Keep the Democrats from doing something really nutty with their $15 plan.
So we can safely say, Chaz, that this is a big enough issue right now that it is not going away, but it's not going to be in this COVID bill once it makes its way through the Senate.
Look, it is good at least to see Republicans getting behind any kind of minimum wage rise. And by the way, it's not over yet. I'll talk to you about that in a second. But depending on whether it is over, it would then be impossible to raise the minimum wage without at least 10 Republicans taking place. So that's important. Even so, I can't see Democrats going along with this proposal because it also involves forcing employers to use e-verify software every time a job applicant is hired to ensure they aren't an illegal immigrant. For Democrats, that is a poison pill. So I'm afraid we may well have a standoff there. But can I just jump in about what I was just saying? It might not be over yet because there is some realpolitik that's possible. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but it's possible. The parliamentarian is an advisor. Their ruling has no weight whatsoever other than what you give it.
Yep.
So the president of the Senate, Kamala Harris, has the ability to just overrule her.
Yep.
Completely. And if she does, if she says, you know what, I disagree, the minimum wage should go in the bill. In order to block Kamala Harris doing that, you need 60 votes. So even though Manchin and Sinema both are totally opposed to Harris overruling the parliamentarian, they would need to find 8 other Democrats to block that happening if Harris wants to overrule.
Yep.
If Harris does overrule, that's a big if, then that is minimum wage in the bill, and Manchin and Sinema need to vote against the entire COVID relief bill to keep the minimum wage out, which I'm not sure they'd want to do.
Yeah.
So it could be interesting.
I suspect that first part is not going to happen because they could change the bird rule as well. They could just change the procedures because the parliamentarian is basically just an umpire going through the rule book and going, no, sorry, you can't do that. They can change the rules. The Senate can do whatever it wants to as long as they get the numbers to change the rules.
But the difference is to change Senate rules, you need 50 votes. To overrule Kamala Harris, you need 60 votes.
Yeah.
So that's the difference.
Yeah.
But I still don't think it will happen because Joe Biden will
36 years in the Senate, Joe Biden's already said he's not going to be
that.
blowing it up. He's not getting rid of the filibuster. And frankly, he's probably quite happy to have the $15 minimum wage out of the way for now. That was just to keep Bernie happy for the time being. We'll see how it plays out. There are around 1,200 positions in the incoming Biden administration that require confirmation by a majority of the US Senate. That includes cabinet secretaries, heads of agencies, bunch of ambassadors as well. And most of those nominations, they just sail through with a rubber stamp. The starting assumption is that Joe Joe Biden, like any American president, is entitled to the team that he wants. But not all nominees get such an easy ride. Take Neera Tanden, friend of the show, former top advisor to Hillary Clinton, former head of the moderate think tank, the Centre for American Progress, and Biden's nominee to head the powerful Office of Management and Budget. She appeared before the Senate Budget Committee last week, chaired by Senator Bernie Sanders, and that was a bit awkward, given she had previously criticised Sanders with now deleted tweets like, "Russia did a lot more to help Bernie than the DNC's random internal emails did to help Hillary." She referred to Republican Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell as Voldemort, after the Harry Potter villain, and Moscow Mitch, suggesting he too was somehow in cahoots with the Kremlin. Of Republican Senator Ted Cruz, she tweeted, "Vampires have more heart." And of moderate Republican Senator Susan Collins, Tanden tweeted, "She's the worst." Well, she tried to explain all of that away as just a part of the political cut and thrust.
Over the last few years, it's been part of my role to be an impassioned advocate. I know there have been some concerns about some of my past language in social media, and I regret that language. And I also want to say, I express that regret to Senator Sanders and other members of this committee.
So, she regrets it. Is Bernie going to let bygones be bygones? No, he's not.
Your attacks were not just made against Republicans. They were vicious attacks made against progressives, people who I have worked with, me personally.
Neera, is there anything you'd like to say to Bernie?
My language and my expressions on social media, caused hurt to people, and I feel badly about that.
There was a lot about her tweets, but Tanden was also quizzed about the amount of money the Centre for American Progress had taken from Wall Street and other corporate special interests. But it was mostly about how she's such a mean girl. Even Republican Senator John Kennedy leapt to Bernie's defence.
The comments were personal. I mean, you call Senator Sanders everything but an ignorant slut.
Where did that come from?
No idea.
What's going on in his head?
He called John Kennedy everything but a gin-stoked bag of idiocy. I don't know where that came from at all. But look, seeing the same Republicans who spent years and years defending or ignoring Donald Trump's tweets, condemning Neera Tanden now, was certainly a little bit rich. Her confirmation is looking shaky. Crucial senators like Democrat Joe Manchin have now ruled out supporting her.
So this all but guarantees that she will not pass, because Tanden's nomination has emerged as something of a lightning rod for the GOP, who sees her as a highly charged and partisan nominee for the Office of Management and Budget.
So the arithmetic gets pretty tricky. Neera Tanden needs to win over at least one Republican vote. And Senator Susan Collins, aka the worst, made it clear that she's a no. So did Mitt Romney. Now, it's fair to say, Chaz, these confirmations aren't just about Neera Tanden or any one person in any one job. A failed nomination does reflect badly back on the incoming administration. It's a way of chipping off a little bit of paint. The Chief of Staff, Ron Klain, has reportedly been the one pushing for Tanden in this particular role. He was also the one that calculated that an apology from her would be enough to win the votes. Well, it looks like that calculation from Ron Klain was wrong. Meanwhile, the nomination of Merrick Garland has been working its way through the committee process this week. Republicans, of course, famously refused to even give Garland a Senate hearing in 2016 when he was nominated by Barack Obama to fill a vacant US Supreme Court seat. Democrats are now in the majority, though, so there was no danger of a repeat of that kind of stonewall as Biden's nominee for Attorney General. And Garland seemed to say all the right things about how he would investigate the Capitol Hill attack and how he will manage investigations without fear or favour, whether it's into a Trump or Hunter Biden. And Garland rose to prominence, of course, in prosecuting the Unabomber and the Oklahoma City bomber in the 1990s. And he gave this explanation as to why fighting white nationalism is very personal to him.
I come from a family where my grandparents fled anti-Semitism and persecution. The country took us in and protected us.
Well, Merrick Garland's performance seems to have gone down a treat. What a nice guy. Even Mitch McConnell, who blocked his Supreme Court nomination, is now voting for him. But I couldn't help but wonder, If Merrick Garland had been the one sending the mean tweets and Neera Tanden had been the one sitting there crying, would she be the one now seen as disqualified still, and he would be just fine?
Look, it is true. A lot of people have been noting this kind of stuff. But for me personally, the whole Joe Manchin, Mitt Romney and Susan Collins are racist and sexist thing, I don't know. Look, I mean, I get it that Biden would be frustrated about having his OMB director being blocked. Arguably, that position should be none of the Senate's business. It wasn't even a Senate-confirmed position when they created it back in 1921 through to 1973 when there was some Richard Nixon stuff. Don't worry about that. I also get that nothing Neera Tanden said would come close to the enormous online douchebaggery of Rich Grenell, but he was confirmed by the Senate easily, including being supported by Manchin and Collins. However, we should note that Grenell was confirmed to be the ambassador to Germany, which no one cares about, not even Germany, whereas this vote is for OMB director, which, as Susan Collins put it, plays a significant role in any administration's fiscal and regulatory agenda, and that Congress has to be able to trust the OMB director to make countless decisions in an impartial manner. Hence her worry that Tanden may be a bit of a hack. Now, I should point out, as John just hinted, we really haven't seen any full tweets of Tanden's that are really all that bad. Certainly not by Twitter's standards. The question remains, though, if Tanden thought she hadn't done anything wrong, then why just after the election did she quietly delete more than 1,000 tweets? That is a lot of tweets. And Susan Collins picked up on this as well, saying Tanden's decision to delete more than 1,000 tweets in the days before her nomination raises concerns about her commitment to transparency. Now, I think that is a fair enough point, and it's not even slightly racist or sexist, especially given it was obvious this was going to happen from the moment Tanden's name was floated way back in November. Back then, Republican Senator Kevin Cramer called her a partisan activist who's going after the senators of the majority party, suggesting with some understatement, she seems to have chosen a path that doesn't lead to a Senate-confirmed office. Also back in November, one of McConnell's advisors described her as a sacrifice to the confirmation gods. And I reckon that is exactly what is going on here. It's not that Susan Collins and Joe Manchin really hate Indian American women. It's that at the start of every presidency, the moderates try to knock off one or two of the incoming president's more problematic nominees to show how moderate they are. And this nominee might be Biden's outlier. I don't know, I'd just take the L and move on.
Look, it may be the fact that she is a partisan warrior, that they've decided let's target her, but if you're going to have a sacrificial lamb, why are they saying, yeah, let's make it one of the relatively few women of colour in this cabinet? It's a strange choice, particularly for Joe Manchin, who had no problems in confirming Jeff Sessions as Attorney General, a pretty sensitive role itself. And Jeff Sessions, let's not forget, he was denied a judgeship because he was found to have said a bunch of racist stuff. But he's okay to be Attorney General as far as Joe Manchin is concerned.
That's true, but they've also confirmed Kristen Clark, who is a black woman with no problems whatsoever. It's not like women of colour aren't being confirmed. The fact is, Joe Biden has nominated a lot of women and a lot of minorities, which he should. That's good. But if you nominate enough of them, some of them are going to get opposed.
OK, so let's say racism is not motivating Joe Manchin's opposition to Neera Tanden, but, well, Senator John Kennedy, Republican Louisiana, kind of let the cat out of the bag a little bit this week when he said her allegiance is not to America, also claiming that Neera Tanden is loyal to Hillary Clinton and not Joe Biden.
Yeah, you got me there. That is definitely a bit dog whistly.
Forget a dog whistle, that's just a full-on.
Yeah.
Now, there is another white male nominee, Obama's Agriculture Secretary Tom Vilsack, who has coasted to confirmation this week, getting his old job back under Joe Biden. The former Iowa governor was approved by 92-7, but interesting, one of these 7 holdouts was actually Bernie Sanders, who said Tom Vilsack is 1, too close to corporate farming interests, and 2, did not do enough in those 8 years in the office before to stop the Agriculture Department itself being racist. On the other hand, another woman of colour in Deb Haaland, who has been nominated as the first Native American to head up the powerful Department of Interior, has been getting anything but a free ride from Republicans like, say, Senator John Barrasso.
I am troubled by many of Representative Holland's views that many in my home state of Wyoming would consider as radical.
Should be said that Joe Manchin has said that he will support Deb Haaland, but is there still a pattern forming here? Certainly some Democratic women in particular, think there may well be.
They do think that. As you say, I suspect Haaland is going to get through, but I'll tell you why John Barrasso might have an issue with Haaland. During her campaign, Haaland sponsored a pledge to push for an outright and immediate ban on fracking. That's completely. And Barrasso has taken over $500,000 in donations from the oil and gas industry over the last 5 years. So he could be a little less concerned about the colour of her skin than he is about the colour of money. And one more thing, Colin Kahl is struggling to get confirmed as well. And he is a white man. So it's not just women of colour who are struggling to get confirmed. Sometimes there are completely normal political reasons. You don't have to jump to racism unless you're talking about Senator Kennedy, and then maybe.
Yeah. I think we might acknowledge that particular point. But look, in better news for achieving President Biden's pledge to have a cabinet as diverse as America, diplomat Linda Thomas-Greenfield has been easily confirmed this week as America's new ambassador to the United Nations, just in time to assume the presidency of the UN Security Council in March. Now, this whole confirmation process, Chaz, it has been taking longer than either the incoming Trump or Obama administrations before them did, slowed down by a number of things. The fact that the Senate was tied up doing the impeachment trial for a period of time. There was also a period of time where they were still trying to nut out a new power sharing agreement, how to allocate the committee chairmanships and everything else in the new Senate. And then, of course, there's the fact that there was about a 2.5 month period that was usually going to be full throttle transition, where Trump was denying that he'd lost the election and gave next to no help for several weeks, at least, for the incoming administration. And I guess the philosophy here is, for Republicans, and this is the theory that Democrats are concerned about, that they're running down the clock. And the more you can push it into sort of the second half of this year, suddenly people are thinking about next year's midterm elections, and maybe in the meantime as well, you get thrown a curveball by fate. So the Democrats, with a 50-50 Senate, 51st vote for Kamala Harris, if they lose one senator, then suddenly they can't muster a majority at all for anything without buy-in from the Republicans. Senator Pat Leahy of Vermont, who chaired the impeachment trial, but he was in hospital in late January, and at the age of 80, well, you know, funny things can happen. So we'll just wait and see what plays out there. But this is a razor-thin majority they're working with.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. It sounds unlikely, but they do actually drop off. These senators are old, and they do lose on average to one senator per term. So it can happen. What I would say, though, is assuming someone doesn't die, they're really, with a 50-50 Senate, there's only 3 reconciliation bills they can possibly pass before the midterms, and maybe an infrastructure bill. So that's like one bill every 4 months. So if someone doesn't die, they can take their time.
Yeah, and in the case of Pat Leahy, the Vermont governor has said, we will replace Leahy with a Democrat until a special election is held. But the nightmare scenario is that Pat Leahy is sick, unable to vote for a period of time, but does he want to, you know, he's already said he'd quite like to run for another term, and he's already into his 80s, so who knows what happens there. But look, at this point, just how firm is former President Donald Trump's grip on the Republican Party? More than a month now after he left office, claiming without evidence that the election had been stolen from him. Since then, he has been acquitted following that impeachment for incitement by a mob to attack the US Capitol building, which some Republicans, like Senator Mitch McConnell, now agree with Democrats was done at the instigation of Donald Trump. They say he bears responsibility for it. Now, this weekend, Donald Trump will be the headline speaker at the Conservative Political Action Conference in Orlando, Florida, where he is expected to tell Republicans he is their presumptive 2024 presidential nominee. However, some Trump confidants have told the Axios news website they expect that he'll pretend to run again, but ultimately he'll probably take a pass. So how likely is a Trump comeback in 3 years? And where does that leave anti-Trump Republicans? Let's ask one. Bill Kristol is the founder of the Weekly Standard and a former member of the Reagan and Bush administrations. Bill Kristol, welcome back to Planet America.
Great to see you again.
Reportedly, Donald Trump this weekend is going to declare himself to be the presumptive Republican presidential nominee for 2024. Mitt Romney, no friend of Donald Trump, says if he runs, he gets the nomination. Do you agree?
It's a long way off, and politics has a way of surprising one. But I do think the big story of the last 3 months here in the U.S. has been that Trump has not faded. You would have thought he might after losing. You would have thought he might after January 6th and the assault on the Capitol, and then he was impeached for that. But it's amazing the hold he still has on about 3/4 of the Republican Party. So for now, at least, I'm afraid it's Trump's party.
What is making that such an indelible hold still on Republicans? Is it simply down to 74 and a bit million voters? Or is there some kind of willingness amongst those in power to keep him at the top of the party?
I mean, some of both. One can't discount 74 million voters. They did pretty well in the 2020 elections, even though Trump lost. They picked up House seats. The Senate's 50-50. So if you're a Republican, you feel that the Trump years were kind of rocky. He's a little crazy. It was a little bit, they could do without some of the excitement, but they don't feel like a party in retreat. They feel like a party that's poised to probably pick up the House in the 2022 midterm elections with a decent chance to win the presidency back in 2024. Maybe most of them probably wouldn't prefer Trump himself, but someone who's a sort of slightly kinder, more disciplined version of Trump. But I do think people like me who are anti-Trump and my friends, and especially the liberal media, frankly, all kind of assume, those Republicans, they're in terrible disarray. Look at the fights they're having. It doesn't feel that way to them. They're looking at the Biden administration, figuring there'll be plenty of opportunities to attack the Biden administration. They just need to kind of hold it together. And what that means for them is keeping Trump and his supporters on board, keeping Trump skeptical types kind of on board by signaling that they're not going to go quite as far as Trump, and just trying to kind of hold that band together. So there's been no repudiation of Trump. For people like me who are anti-Trump, that was the thing we were looking for and hoping for, a clear repudiation of Trump and Trumpism, and that hasn't happened.
The notion of Trumpism is interesting, the extent to which that now exists, whether Trump runs or not, and that kind of Trump 2.0s are going to be lining up in 2024, or indeed in the primaries next year for the midterms. Has the party fundamentally changed, or does it snap back if Trump is indicted on tax fraud or is in trouble in Fulton County or something?
Yeah, I don't think it snaps back. I think some people thought it might after November 3rd. More people thought it might after January 6th. The failure to snap back those two times tells me it's pretty deeply embedded. The habits of Trumpism, if you want to call them that, the appeal of the demagoguery, the nativism, the playing on sort of anxieties and resentments against liberals of all kinds, and exaggerating the threat from the left and so forth. That's now pretty deep. I think 4 years of Trump as president, hammering away at it, has made it deeper. And an awful lot of politicians have now, followed that path to victory in primaries and some in general elections. And so they're that's kind of their brand. It's not just Trump's brand anymore. It's become much more, unfortunately, from my point of view, the Republican brand.
Is this a workable realignment for the Republican Party? The voters they are appealing to now and those that they have alienated. Does it get you to majorities in the House? Does it get you to the presidency again?
I think medium long term, it's a losing hand because the Republicans are betting on a shrinking percentage of the electorate. But short term, they didn't do so badly in 2020. And if Biden makes some mistakes, or if just for reasons beyond his control, we get a recession or something goes wrong in foreign policy, it's not out of the question that Trump himself or Trump 2.0 could win in 2024. I think there's too much liberal overconfidence, in a sense, having defeated Trump in 2020, that somehow the whole thing is untenable. I wish it were, but I'm not so sure it is.
Bill, there is, of course, a scenario that Democrats are hoping for. They know that midterms for first-term presidents don't necessarily work out too well, but they also know that once we're through this pandemic, the economy could come roaring back in 2022 in a way that could be very bad for Republicans.
Yeah, I think so. And I think President Biden is focused on the virus, and I think that's the right thing from a policy point of view, but it's also smart politically. He's pushing through this big stimulus, this big economic relief package. Some of the intelligent, even liberal economists are a little worried it might be too big, but I think the Biden administration's attitude is, let's get out of this thing. Let's give ourselves plenty of margin of error. We can always raise taxes a little bit a year or two from now. The Fed can cut down a little bit on the money supply and so forth. And I think that's a reasonable judgment on the Biden administration's part. So that's kind of the tension. I mean, they're trying to govern successfully. If he does, if we come roaring back, and if people feel that Biden has done a good job on that, then the political dynamics could change. But what worries me is you would have thought after Trump's incredible mismanagement of the pandemic, the 500,000 deaths, that people would say, well, that's kind of we've tested it. He's not a candidate anymore. It's not an idea. So, TV celebrity, outsider businessman, that'll be an interesting experiment. We had 4 years of Trump. And for me, the fact that 74 million Americans stuck with him on November 3rd is a lesson. And it's not going to, I don't think that just goes away or turns around overnight.
Bill, you've written this week about the idea that some self-identified never-Trump Republicans should think about ways in which it's one thing to help Joe Biden get elected, but now what do we do to help him govern? And you've even suggested there could be virtually a kind of a red dog Democrat wing, former Republicans, if not formally joining the Democratic Party, but to find ways to moderate Joe Biden. How do you see that working, particularly given that he's got, similar pressures coming from the left of the Democratic Party to be going big on things like $15 minimum wage increases?
It's hard to start, in theory, one can imagine a third party, centrist, center-right, someone like me would be very comfortable in it. It's hard to start third parties in America, hard to win the Republican Party back from Trump, which doesn't mean that organizations like mine won't be supporting those Republicans who voted for impeachment and conviction and trying to recruit good candidates and help them in primaries, but it doesn't look that promising on the Republican side. As you say, precisely because Biden is under pressure from the left, isn't one of the best things you could do if you believe in a more moderate centrist politics to put pressure, a little bit of counter pressure from the center right. And President Biden personally is pretty centrist. I mean, it seems to me a little weird. Some of my Republican friends, we mostly voted for Biden. I certainly did. Happy to have a centrist Democrat. And then a lot of Republicans have said, okay, well, now there's a centrist Democrat president, but let's just go worry about the Republican Party. Well, there's plenty to worry about there. But for the country's sake, I do think it's important that Biden be a successful president. If we go through these 4 years of Trump, and then we have a Democratic president and things fall apart in various ways, I think you'll spur radicalism and really irresponsible radicalism on both the left and the right. So just from the country's point of view, I didn't expect to be saying this. If you had asked me 5 years ago, would I be here really rooting for a Democratic president and trying to push them a little bit to what I think could be sounder policies? But I genuinely just think it's important for the country, and I think it's doable. I think the Democratic Party has recovered a certain amount of, well, it never was that far left, but President Biden won the primary, right? People didn't really expect him to, and he defeated the left.
So, in practical terms, how is that influence or pressure applied? Is it getting behind more moderate Senate candidates next year? What do you anticipate happening there?
Yeah, and there are a lot of practical choices, and I don't think there's one, correct answer on this. Here in Virginia, where I live, right near Washington, D.C., there'll be primaries in both the Republican and Democratic side for governor. Virginia is one of the few states that elects in this off year, in the odd-numbered year. I could vote in the Republican primary. I think the Republicans are likely to nominate a real Trump-type supporter. Or I could vote, and because Virginia doesn't have party registration, you can choose which primary to vote in. I could vote in the Democratic primary and vote for a competent moderate, Terry McAuliffe, who was governor of Virginia before, and he'll be in a tough fight with a Democrat who's considerably to his left. So I think people like me will have this practical choice. Where can we make more difference? Where can we end up with an actual government that is more in accord with what we think is better for, in this case, for Virginia? But, in parallel, the same will be that people will be making those decisions in Senate races and House races, and ultimately in 2024.
Well, Bill Kristol, always a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. Thanks.
On a should note, we did also book an interview with the chairman of CPAC, Matt Schlapp, who's been a Trump advisor, but at the last minute he was unavailable and there wasn't a pro-Trump alternative available to us. It was just last week that 97-year-old former Republican Senator Bob Dole announced that he was being treated for stage 4 lung cancer. And over the weekend, he received a surprise visit from somebody he served in the Senate with for about a quarter of a century, one President Joe Biden, who described Bob Dole as a close friend. It's November 1996.
William Jefferson Clinton has a job for 4 more years.
Our journey is not done. My fellow Americans,
We have work to do, and that's what this election was all about.
The third youngest president in history has just defeated the man running to be the oldest 73-year-old Republican Senator, Bob Dole.
I have said repeatedly in this campaign that the president is my opponent, not my enemy, and I wish him well and I pledge my support.
Dole was gracious, but the defeat was galling to many Conservatives. He'd lost to someone who represented everything they hated about the post-war baby boom generation. A selfish, unfaithful draft dodger. They called him Slick Willie.
I can only tell you that I don't think Senator Dole is too old to be president. It's the age of his ideas that I question.
Ouch. In fact, Bob Dole's 1996 presidential bid never really got off the ground. It felt more like a farewell tour. His fall from a stage in California summed up his stumbling campaign. Dole had taken large donations from the tobacco industry as well, estimated about $500,000, and he looked pretty bought when he said, "I guess it's addictive to some and not to others." He looked old, out of touch, just another political hack. It was the end of 2 decades at the centre of the American political stage, beginning when Dole was made Gerald Ford's vice presidential running mate.
I'm just very pleased to be here. I'm very proud to be on the ticket with President Ford.
Dole was in the first ever vice presidential debate with fellow Senator, Democrat Walter Mondale. Despite flashes of wit, Dole mostly came across as stern and a bit of a hatchet man.
I figured up the other day, if we added up the killed and wounded in Democrat wars in this century, it'd be about 1.6 million Americans, enough to fill the city of Detroit.
During that debate, Dole talked about his own military service, which had left him with a withered right arm and almost cost him his life.
My whole life changed because of my experience in Italy. I know the Italian people. I know they're God-fearing, freedom-loving people. I couldn't quite understand what
It was May 1945, just 3 weeks before the end of the war in Europe. 21-year-old Lieutenant Bob Dole was leading an American Army platoon in the mountains of northern Italy. During a battle with German forces, Dole was hit by machine gun fire or shrapnel, maybe both, right across his arms and back. He lay paralysed in a bomb crater for 9 hours, bleeding heavily, his spine damaged, his right arm almost severed, the shoulder blade and collarbone ripped away. He wasn't expected to live. He spent more than 3.5 years in a body cast in various military hospitals in Europe and the United States. After suffering a near-fatal infection, he was sent back to his hometown of Russell, Kansas, to be closer to his family when he died.
Cigarette?
At that time, the Army handed out free cigarettes. You could smoke in hospital beds. And for a time, Bob Dole did smoke, but later he quit, and slowly his body recovered from his wounds, although his right arm could never be put back together. Dole went to night school and started placing pens or pieces of paper in his permanently clenched right fist to disguise the injury. He studied law under the GI Bill. He won his first election to the Kansas House in 1950, the US House in 1960, and the Senate 8 years later.
Congressman Robert Dole, the Republican.
He earned a reputation as a conservative prepared to compromise. He supported civil rights and advocated for veterans and people with disabilities. 4 years after he and Ford lost to Carter and Mondale, Senator Bob Dole ran for president in a crowded 1980 Republican field dominated by the star power of former California Governor Ronald Reagan. 8 years later, Dole tried again to snatch the nomination away from Reagan's Vice President George Bush, and he won a surprise victory in the first-in-the-nation Iowa caucuses, but he couldn't stop Bush's march to the nomination and the White House.
Solemnly swear.
3 decades on, at the age of 95, with a little help, Bob Dole would lift his battered frame from his wheelchair for a final salute to his friend and former rival. Dole supported Jeb Bush's White House campaign in 2016 before becoming the only former Republican nominee to endorse Donald Trump.
Well, I like Donald Trump because he's a strong leader and he is someone who can work with Congress. If you can't work with Congress, you can't get anything done.
But by last December, Dole had seen enough, telling reporters the election is over and Biden will be president. It's a pretty bitter pill for Trump, but it's a fact. He lost. Three-quarters of a century after he nearly died on the battlefield in Italy, Bob Dole is again fighting for his life. President Biden visited him at his apartment in Washington's infamous Watergate building a day after making this pledge.
I want you to know that once we beat COVID, we're going to do everything we can to end cancer as we know it.
You know, John, there have been a lot of changes under this administration so far, but there is one particular hobby horse that never seems to change. So, what's the deal?
Yes, here's the deal. I don't buy for 1 second that the vitality of American manufacturing is a thing of the past. American manufacturing was the arsenal of democracy in World War II, and it must be part of the engine of American prosperity now.
Brings a tear to the eye, doesn't it? Like Trump before him, Biden's administration is all about 3 simple words.
You're a lying dog-faced pony soldier.
Not those 3 words.
Made in America.
Those 3 words. That's why Biden signed a Made in America executive order to support America's manufacturers, businesses and workers through the federal government buying mostly American. And look, that is all fine. It's true that manufacturing employment has fallen from about 35% of total employment after World War II down to below 9% of total employment today, and none of Trump's talking up his record made any difference at all. So look, that is pretty bad. If you ignore the fact that every other wealthy industrial country has been following the same path. UK, France, Japan, Germany, they're all seeing the same trends. In fact, between 1995 and 2011, countries with trade surpluses in manufacturing experienced slightly larger declines in manufacturing employment shares than countries with manufacturing trade deficits. And there's a reason for all that. High-end manufacturing is more efficient than it used to be. If we look at American manufacturing employment, say, since 1987, it's about 70% of what it was, whereas real manufacturing output is 160% of what it was over the same period. There's more automation now, more efficiency. Manufacturing simply requires fewer employees than it used to. And it's not just that. Manufacturing goods in general are just less important to the economy than they used to be. This is what personal consumption spending on goods looks like as a percentage of GDP over the last 30 years. Whereas this is what personal consumption spending on services looks like over the same period. So unsurprisingly, given all this, manufacturing really isn't where the jobs are likely to be found. This is what employment in the goods-producing industries has looked like since World War II. Pretty steady, not exactly gangbusters. Whereas this is what employment in the services-producing industry has looked like. Wow! It kind of makes you wonder why both the last 2 presidents have been so focused on that line. There are just 12 million workers in the whole of the manufacturing industry. But every single month in America, 1.7 million jobs disappear. Poof. 1.7 million. Not in a pandemic, just normally. And about that many jobs are also created. Not to say that manufacturing should be ignored, of course. Those are good, high-paying jobs. It'd be nice if every now and then we could hear a president at least mention the services industry where the vast majority of Americans are actually employed. Please?
Yes, it's that time of the week. It's time for a fireside chat, Chaz.
And I want to tell you a story, John, just before you jump in. It all starts with the Biden administration reopening what the Washington Post called a migrant facility for children. Now, conservatives took one look at those bars on those windows and they said, kids in cages? That's now migrant facility for children. And it's true that when that exact same facility was opened briefly back in 2019, this is what happened.
Protesters lined the road leading up to what the government says is a temporary shelter for unaccompanied minors.
The workers providing the beds for that facility also went on strike during that period because, as Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez put it, they were making beds to cage children. And soon they indeed shut it down. Until now. Leading to awkward questions like this.
Kamala Harris said that this facility, putting people in this facility, was a human rights abuse committed by the United States government. And Joe Biden said, under Trump, there have been horrifying scenes of at the border of kids being kept in cages. Now it's not under Trump, it's under Biden.
And leading to frankly ridiculous trolling like this.
What we are seeing here is the cruelty and inhumanity of Joe Biden's immigration policies.
Yeah, Steve Miller, just a step too far, I feel. Give me strength. But what is going on here? Well, it all started on day one of the Biden administration when he supposedly began sweeping away Trump's immigration barriers, which led to a complete freakout over at Foxlandia.
Mark my word, people will die, people will be raped, people will be victimized by criminals that shouldn't even be here. It's coming.
Well, it wasn't coming because despite Biden creating headlines with his executive order pausing deportations for his first 100 days, that deportation freeze didn't actually apply to new illegal immigrants. In fact, America continued to automatically expel almost all newly arriving single adults and families because of COVID regulations. Furthermore, a federal judge slapped a national injunction on that order, blocking it from being carried out. So Biden issued a guidance just giving up on the idea of a deportation freeze entirely. Meanwhile, Biden claimed to be processing all the asylum seekers waiting in Mexico under the Remain in Mexico program. There were 28,000 active cases over there, some waiting for years. Well, America is now processing 25 of them a day. Woo! They hope to eventually process 300 per day of 28,000. So the dam isn't exactly bursting there either. People are thrilled that Biden rescinded the infamous zero tolerance policy that led to every adult border crosser being arrested and therefore thousands of families being separated under Trump. But not so many noticed that in the fine print of Biden's executive order, he left ICE with the discretion to charge border crossers after taking into account a number of other factors. All reasonable factors, I might add, but bottom line, family separations have not been banned. They are just meant to be more reasonable. So in summary, there's a lot more sizzle than steak in Biden's immigration reforms to date. But one thing is very real, and that is border interceptions are rising. You might recall back in 2019, there was a bit of a crisis on the border, but things improved until the middle of last year. And since then, there's been a steady climb. This is not Biden's fault, okay? It's been going for 9 months. But Biden has to deal with it now because the one group that Biden is not deporting on the border are unaccompanied children. And they are also coming in larger numbers. Under the law, the Border Patrol is supposed to hand them over to the refugee office within 3 days of catching them. But due to COVID, the refugee office can only use 8,000 of its 13,000 beds at any one time. And nearly 90% of those 8,000 beds have already been taken, with 1,500 new children apprehended just last week. And there are another 750 waiting to be placed right now. So do the maths, and the refugee office is screwed. It's probably already run out of beds, hence the need to open whatever facilities they can find. So, does this mean that Biden is doing exactly what he criticised Trump for? Well, no. These were the kids in cages under Border Patrol custody. That wasn't anything like these refugee resettlement facilities, although conservatives are right that lefties like AOC pretended these facilities were caging kids back in 2019. But the most important difference is this. Right now, the Biden administration is trying to find a family for every unaccompanied kid. The kids in those facilities are waiting for a placement because the government doesn't know where else to put them. Whereas the Trump administration was taking accompanied kids and splitting them from their families on purpose. Government records show the whole point of family separations at the border was to deter families from immigrating. And if you don't believe me, listen to this guy.
If they feel there will be separation, they don't come.
So that is the difference, John. Biden is in a world of hurt with illegal immigration, no doubt. This is bound to get extremely ugly. But what he is doing and what Trump did a chalk and cheese go.
But Joe Biden is going to have a similar problem soon. They talk about push and pull factors when it comes to illegal immigration and border crossings in the United States. As the COVID pandemic gets better in the United States and the US economy gets better as a result of that, there's going to be a huge pull factor for low-wage workers to go back into the United States. Similarly, there is going to be, it seems, an ongoing COVID problem in South and Central America that is going to be a push factor to get people, again, wanting to go to the United States. So we could see, come the summertime, June, July, August this year, that Joe Biden has got a big problem on his hands. But now it's time for...
That's a bunch of malarkey.
And once again this week, we have a whole bunch of malarkey from Fox News host Tucker Carlson. In fact, he's becoming such a fixture of this segment, I think he's earned his very own sting. And here's what Tucker Carlson said after Biden's nominee for Attorney General Merrick Garland said he would make it a top priority to investigate the Capitol attack by perpetrators, including white supremacists.
There's no evidence that white supremacists were responsible for what happened on January 6th. That's a lie.
Can that be right? Is there really no evidence white supremacists were responsible for the attack on the Capitol? Actually, no.
6 people linked to the white supremacist group, the Oath Keepers, are charged with planning their attack. They're charged with conspiring to obstruct Congress's certification of the 2020 presidential election. Some of them are also charged with breaking into the Capitol.
And let's not forget this guy.
His name is Robert Keith Packer. He's 56. He's been arrested down in the Newport News, Virginia area. And this is part of the now, we're told, 200 cases.
A hoodie glorifying a Nazi death camp or somebody wielding a Confederate flag would qualify in most people's books as white supremacist. It is true that plenty of the rioters have not been identified as white supremacists, although that could well change when evidence is presented at trial. The New York Times has found of around 230 people charged over the riot so far, only 31 are known to have ties to a militant extremist group. That still does make Tucker Carlson's claim, though, that there is, quote, no evidence that white supremacists were responsible, demonstrably false, according to the fact-checkers. But they do also point out that Tucker doesn't believe in white supremacy either. He says it's a hoax, just like the Russia hoax, Jazz.
And by the way, part of that same chat of Tucker's there, he said that no one really believed in QAnon either. That was just made up by the media. I invite Tucker Carlson to visit our Facebook page. People believe in QAnon.
Right.
But before we go, we can't leave you without defending the honour of a very good boy. This was a segment about Champ, Joe Biden's dog, on the ironically named Newsmax.
This dog needs a bath and a comb and all kinds of love and care. I've never seen a dog in the White House like this. I remember Buddy, I remember Millie, I remember lots of dogs, but not a dog who seems, I don't know how much love and care he is getting. Let's bring in the historians. Former advisor to George H.W. Bush, that's the White House where I remember Millie. Millie had like a staff and they really took care of her, very beautiful dog. This dog looks like from the junkyard. And I love that dog, but he looks like he's not been well cared for.
No, not at all. Thank you for having us. No, he looks very dirty and disheveled and very unlike a presidential dog.
Champ's been papped and dissed. I reckon he looks fine, but the fact remains that Biden got him in, 2008 after the election. So that makes him 12, which according to the American Kennel Club means he's about to head off to the big doggy park in the sky. I mean, seriously, look at this dog trying to walk. He practically needs a wheelchair. I don't think he needs to dole up for your edification, Newsmax guys. So take your historians and leave Champ alone.
Absolutely outrageous. He's saying that this dog is being neglected. It's extraordinary. It's a good thing that Newsmax has a print edition because I think Champ would know exactly what to do with that particular sheet of paper. And with that, we're out of time for another trip to Planet America. We'll see you back here at the same time next week.
Do not forget the podcast, which you can find there. And otherwise, we'll see you next week.
Bye-bye.